What's more satisfying than taking down a colossal fire-breathing dragon with a giant sword axe hybrid and an anthropomorphic cat's sidekick? Not a whole lot, and when you do as well as Monster Hunter has done, it makes for one of the best gaming experiences around. Monster Hunter World is the best Monster Hunter game, period, and coming from a longtime fan, that is saying a lot. This title has done so much in terms of streamlining what has already existed and making it palatable for new players, but at the same time, it doesn't sacrifice what veterans have loved about the series for many years. So if the core loop of hunting, gathering, and crafting seems enjoyable to you, then you will love Monster Hunter. For those a little apprehensive, let's get on to the review. My name is Nathaniel Terencio, and this is Monster Hunter World. Monster Hunter World has taken everything about the previous entries and cranked it up all the way when it came to presentation. The game is bigger and more beautiful than anything before it, more likely due to the game being on current generation console systems. For a long time, the games have been released on handhelds, and while this had benefits, it did limit what the games could achieve graphically. Monster Hunter World, however, flaunts its beautiful graphical fidelity right from the get-go with some sick cinematics and gorgeous art design. The art design has always been one of the franchise's best features, and seeing these armor sets, monsters, and environments rendered on modern hardware is quite the visual treat. And with some of the designs being the best in the franchise, you get for a very charming game that looks good to boot. Another huge improvement from previous iterations is how much movement there is on screen. Previous games have always had snappy and great animations for the monster and player, however the environment always felt lifeless and dull. They were just the bare minimum. They may have been designed great, but they sure as hell didn't look good. However, World's environments have so much movement that they feel real and breathing. When combined with the game's newfound environmental movement and the great character animations and monster animations that the series is known for, you have a very good looking game when in motion. However, not all is perfect, for the game's biggest problem is its frame rate. When in combat, the frame rate is always stable, and when monsters are right in front of you, they move quite smoothly. However, when something is in the distance and not relatively far, it does get choppy, and it does drop in quality. It's more of a distraction than anything, but it is a noticeable distraction. Overall, Monster Hunter is a great looking game, and despite the graphical hiccups in terms of its frame rate and texture issues, it is still very pretty to look at. This entry in the Monster Hunter franchise has been given a facelift in terms of its story. The franchise has never been known for quality storytelling, but they did make strides in this iteration. One of the biggest changes is the visuals. It is much more cinematic this time around with some amazing pre-rendered cutscenes. That, on top of being the first Monster Hunter game with some real, actual voice acting, and you got for a game that looks good when you're in a cinematic. That being said, despite all the visual flair, this is still the same Monster Hunter story you've seen multiple times. There's an Elder Dragon that's doing weird things and you must go find out why, and that's more or less the plot. It doesn't get any deeper than that, and sometimes it feels like the story is just barely passable. But I think if anything, the story really succeeds in being just a very long-form tutorial. The best and biggest asset of Monster Hunter's story is the fact that it is such a good way for newbies to get into the game at a good pace. Quite early on, you go on your first real hunt, which is way better than any previous Monster Hunter game where you're doing fetch quests until you get to your big hunt. And from then on, the game teaches you mechanics with each new hunt and each new mission. It's a good way of introducing mechanics without overwhelming the player. In my opinion, it is much more intuitive to teach mechanics through the story mode so that you are more prepared for endgame content like the high rank missions. While Monster Hunter World's plot is paper thin, it is a very good tool at teaching players how to play the game. It is paced rather well, and while not extremely fast, you do feel rewarded for each quest you undertake. And when you do get story beats, they are really pretty to look at. They're just not particularly written well. Overall, I think the story does what it needs to do in terms of teaching new players how to play the game for when the real hunts start. If you're looking for a deep and meaningful original plot, this isn't the game for you. Otherwise, it's just passable. Monster Hunter as a series has always been known for its extremely unforgiving and difficult combat system. It's much slower paced than other action RPGs, and that has turned some people off. While it's certainly not fast, it is much more optimized this time around and way more accessible. While animations still have a heavy commitment, you do have movement options to accompany them. Given the way the level's designed and the new mechanics added to each weapon, which there are too many to go into in this video, you have so much option for movement and finesse when fighting a monster. This doesn't mean you don't have to be careful, you still have to be opportunistic with your attacks because damn, these monsters hurt. Monster Hunter is all about finding the opportunity in which you can attack while mitigating the amount of damage you take. You can't just go in guns blazing, you have to be patient. Every combat encounter with a super strong monster feels intense, and there's a lot of tension to be built with each swing you do. And with so many weapons, you are bound to find something that fits your particular playstyle. Each weapon class plays extremely different, and the fact that there are different weapons in each class that you can craft that have different elemental styles means that there's so much room for experimentation. And combat does feel more intuitive this time around with the addition of the environment as well as the new tool, the Slinger. These additions, plus the better UI, use of shortcuts, and less clutter when gathering, make for a game that is challenging but not as tedious and clunky as past games. Monster Hunter's addicting cycle is to craft and prepare, hunt, loot, and repeat. This may sound like your standard RPG grindfest, but there's a lot of depth to be had. Most of the cool items in-game cannot be bought. You have to either craft them or gather them from the world or off monster parts. So you are constantly hunting and gathering to gain better gear to hunt and gather more things. And because of the way unlocking quests and pacing works, it feels a lot less monotonous than the previous entries in the franchise. Monster Hunter World is also just jam-packed with content. There are tons of quests, craftable items, unlockables, and endgame versions of all those things. Also take into consideration that you can play with up to 3 other hunters. Monster Hunter World really does shine when you're playing with a group of friends, just coordinating and figuring out the best way to take out a monster. And if you don't have a friend to play with, you can always use the new SOS flare. The flare can be used after a story cutscene or at any point during an expedition or optional quest. After using it, hunters can join you and help you during the quest. If you were to say this is just another Monster Hunter game with quality of life changes, you might be right, but man, these quality of life changes really does improve the gaming experience. The gameplay improvements have made what is generally seen as a very difficult action RPG into a very difficult action RPG, but at least it's more accessible now. Monster Hunter World is not only the best Monster Hunter ever, but a promising move going forward for the franchise. The most surprising thing about this title is that while everything that has been changed may not be perfect, it is an improvement from past games. There is also so much content and little things that going through the minutia of every mechanic would take days. I have very little in terms of complaints with the game, and while the franchise may not still be for everyone, it is certainly the most accessible entry point with all the accessibility features they have added. When all is said and done, this is a wonderful world to lose many hours in. I give Monster Hunter a 4.5 out of 5. Thank you for sticking around to the end of the video. I have left a link to the article down below which has much more detail than I could have ever put into this video. And if you want to see more reviews, please feel free to check out HeyPoorPlayer.com and our social media. Thank you so much again. Have a good day.